The Keynesian explanation of the Great Depression leads us to thinking about the problems of aggregate demand. And so we have this framework where we can see that aggregate demand can fluctuate wildly with animal spirits and the speculation from the Keynesian beauty contest vision of how stock markets work. Tie that in with the multiplier effect, and we get aggregate demand acting rather wildly and sometimes getting stuck too low. We want to reiterate this story in the emphasis of aggregate demand within the Keynesian framework with another explanation of the Keynesian approach to how we can get stuck at too low a level of aggregate demand. And this is called the Keynesian circular flow approach. The idea here is that the vision of the economy suggests a circular flow-like framework in which earning and spending are brought into balance by changes in the level of employment. I'm going to take from Roger Garrison's circular flow framework slides and try and show you guys the circular flow setup. So here's the basic idea of the circular flow framework. First, we have to understand that there are businesses and organizations, and they're going to be related to workers who are also could be factor owners or consumers, right? So if you're a worker, you're also usually a consumer. And we want to see the relationship between workers, consumers, and business organizations. And so first up, what we're going to see is that we have workers providing to business organization labor and other factor services, right? So businesses receive the labor from workers, but in order to receive that labor, what do they have to do? Well, they have to pay those workers income. Right? And so we have this kind of exchange process here where the workers provide labor and then the business organizations pay back income. But now what we have to do is we have to look at the other side of the circle here. What we have to see is that goods and services are provided from the businesses to the consumers. So the workers provide work in order to get income. But why do they want income? They want income so that they can receive goods and services. But in order to get those goods and services, what do they have to do? Well, they have to spend some money. There's expenditures there. So the consumers spend money at the business organizations. And so what we can see is that there's this circular relationship here. Workers provide labor to create goods and services. The businesses pay them in income. These workers with their income use that money as expenditures to purchase goods and services. Garrison showcases in his famous slides on the circular flow model this idea of the circular flow, but then puts animation to it. He says, let the speed of rotation indicate the strength or weakness of the economy. The faster is stronger. So if the economy is circulating money through in such a way where we have just an average number of exchanges, sure, the workers work some, they get paid some, they buy some goods, and they get some goods and services. Hey, that's a moving along circular flow. But it could be that we could speed the economy up. We could make this exchange process happen more quickly, that the circular flow is really humming along and the economy is really moving forward. But we could also slow down and become pessimistic. We could slow down our expending and we could have the economy sputter. The idea is like an engine stalling out, and we don't have enough gas to keep it going. The concept that the circular flow diagram really showcases to us is the Keynesian idea of the paradox of thrift. This is an idea where an increase in saving slows down the circular flow. It slows down aggregate demand, and our economy can sputter without enough spending going on. Aggregate demand can be kept too low. Our animal spirits can be reduced, and we can have this decrease in our aggregate demand. An increase in savings would slow down that circular flow, that we're not pumping money through. As we're going through the circular flow, as we get paid, we're taking money out of that circular flow. Instead of taking the money we earn and then purchasing goods and services back from other businesses, we just save it. So it's slowing down that circular flow. It's a decrease in spending that leads to a decrease in employment, which leads to a further decrease in spending, which leads to a further decrease in employment, which leads to yet a further decrease in spending, and everything slows down and becomes stuck. You can tie this to the idea of the marginal propensity to consume and the multiplier. If our marginal propensity to consume is really, really low, we can think about what happens to our multiplier and how our aggregate demand could really slow down. Keynesians believe that the paradox of thrift is a notable fallacy of composition. A fallacy of composition is the idea that just because for one individual we have something, that it's true for all individuals, or something like that. One component, if it's true for one component, it's true for all components. So just because for an individual, gold and silver signify wealth, that does not mean for a nation it is true. That was part of the backbones of Adam Smith's argument in an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, that mercantilist policies are just kind of untrue. That if a nation has more and more gold, it doesn't mean that the nation is actually more and more wealthy. Think of another example. If a runner runs faster, he can win the race. Any individual, if you run faster, you're more likely to win the race. Could we then conclude that if all runners run faster, they can all win the race? Or that they're all more likely to win the race? No, just because it's true for a part doesn't mean it's true for the whole. And this is what the Keynesians argue, that if a person saves more, it might be prudent for that individual. But is it true that if all people save more, it is also prudent for our overall economy? This is the paradox of thrift, that being thrifty might make sense for an individual, but it doesn't make sense for our overall economy. It slows down our circular flow and perhaps can get our overall aggregate demand stuck too low. There's a fallacy of composition here. The paradox of thrift is a common political expression. This fits into the average person's notion of understanding the macroeconomy. The paradox of thrift is why President Bush made a big to-do of buying a pair of woolen socks at a suburban shopping mall around Christmas of 1991. And President Clinton referred to every increase in spending that he proposed as an investment. If we increase spending, it just gets the circular flow going even more, so it's an investment. And this is also why President Obama spent over $800 billion in stimulus money for the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act in 2009. We need to get that circular flow going again. Well, this is at least the explanations that they give. They say, hey, this will actually help. The way that it works is that thrift is savings. And in economics, income is equal to consumption plus savings. This is the way this is defined. So if savings goes up, ceteris paribus, this means that consumption is down. So the Keynesian view is that if savings is up, consumption is down, well then aggregate demand is down, and that will pull output down as well. The classicals suggest something different. They say that this increase in savings is an increase in the supply of loanable funds. Remember, the loanable funds graph is the graph that Keynes said he was doing away with. But the outcome for the classicals is lower interest rates. The decline in the market rate of interest is the key to filling the gap in demand created by higher savings. If we lower those interest rates, we'll get more investment back in and we'll have this kind of long-run growth. Demand will not shrink in the classical view. With lower interest rates in the classical view, what you get is an increase in C for large-scale purchases and an increase in I, investment, which kind of counteracts or balances that original drop in consumption that the Keynesians view as causing this sputtering of the circular flow. Remember, the Keynesians said, hey, if you increase savings, that means you're dropping consumption and that's bad. The classical view is, hey, if you increase savings, yes, that will drop current consumption for normal people who are now saving instead. But that works through the loanable funds to reduce the interest rate. That lower interest rate allows for a few more large-scale purchases and consumption, like buying a car, or investing in things. So total output is not really impacted in the classical view, it's just redirected, whereas in the Keynesian view, it is actually dropped. In this Keynesian setup, we once again see how we could end up in a Great Depression, how we could end up stuck at an equilibrium below full employment. Once again, the idea is that aggregate demand is the key, that spending is not happening, and that we could get stuck below full employment. We see that the loanable funds market doesn't just redirect everything, and the economy is not rapidly self-equilibrating. To learn more, click on the video here to take the next step in seeing, well, what can we do?